the end of the day, the organization, the entire enterprise, the organization is responsible for figuring this out. And when you ask 6 people that should care in an organization of various levels, and 6 of them say, I don't know, it's not my problem. But at the end of the day, no one is doing anything because all 6 of them are pointing their finger at somebody else, and there's a gaping hole in the security posture.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And his sidekick, Dino.
Okay, sidekick. What's today? What are you thinking about today?
Let's talk about IT SOCs, Security Operations Centers.
Okay.
Seems like a good topic, don't you think?
That'd be a great topic because I would say there's probably not a lot of them. There are significant differences in the way that an IT SOC would handle feeds into that and responses to those things versus how an OT-centric SOC should do that. So yeah, I think that sounds like a great topic.
So we could talk about some use case studies, right? I got one.
Okay, perfect.
Very large beverage company, global. It's had a SOC, right? And they've installed one of these OT IDS platforms, and only to learn many, many years later that they were seeing a third of their assets.
Ouch.
What do you think that is?
I'm going to guess because the alerts were going to the SOC, probably offshore or not in the U.S. They don't understand the assets on the plant floor at the physical locations, have never been there, can't validate it. Back to what we say all the time, localization, think global, act locally, and they don't know what they don't know. How close did I get?
Pretty good. Bottom line is they don't know what's in the plants. And so they assume they got a tool out there that's picking stuff up and they're getting everything they need and not recognizing that 50% or 2/3 of the assets aren't even part of your baseline, right? And it's back to the old story we say a lot is the assets don't belong to the SOC.
Correct.
Right? They don't belong to IT. These are assets that are managed and supported and implemented and maintained by a completely different group of people. In the IT world, you manage your enterprise. You manage the server farms and the network and the applications and the desktops and the printers and cloud. You manage that. Mm-hmm. In the OT world, you manage next to nothing.
Right.
Very little. The closest you might get is some of the network in the plant, but it's definitely not the PLCs. It's not the SCADA systems or the DCSs or the motor control centers or the AGVs or the HMIs or engineering workstations. It's none of that. So from a SOC perspective, if you can't get your arms around it, how are you going to manage that, right?
You look at just the logistics, the data feeds that come in from an IT perspective. If you have to do something, there's normally an endpoint protection, or there's normally a MDR, there's normally a something that you could do to isolate and remove that asset, that you can do automatically.
Well, think of it like this. If I'm making product X, and I'm going to run that for a week. And then the next week, I'm going to run product Y, and I'm going to do a line changeover. I'm going to probably take some of that equipment offline because I don't need it to run this product. The IT organization isn't close enough to understand operationally what's going on in that plant. And so let's say they were monitoring those assets. Well, you think the plant wants a phone call and say, hey, portions of your packaging line are no longer operating and visible? And the plant's like, well, yeah, we know because we're running product Y today. And
we turned them off.
We move them out of the way while we run this other product, right? And so it's just wasted energy, wasted motion, and to the point where they just ignore those calls that come in from IT, right? Like a PLC change. I talk about that all the time. Making a PLC change to an IT organization means nothing to them. if they were watching that PLC change being made, would they call the plant to say, hey, somebody made a change to the PLC? And the plant's going to be like, well, yeah, we made that. We're doing a line changeover. We're switching products today. So how do you get close enough to be able to understand that, right? To build the continuity between what operationally what's going on in the plant and match that up with the systems that are monitoring your industrial assets, And
Yeah.
it's back to what you said earlier. You can think globally, but you got to act locally.
Well, again, another fundamental difference is, that first in line to address anything when a call comes from the SOC is going to need to be that engineer or that controls technician that's managing that piece of equipment on the plant floor to say, hey, what are you doing? What did you do? I call it the interpretation layer. Someone's got to interpret what that threat came in. Is it a process integrity threat? Is it a known signature threat? What is it? And how do you interpret that before an action can take place?
Right.
And that is a lot of times missed.
Well, and the other thing is, if you do have an event, who's your first responder, right? I know we've stated that before in previous podcasts, but it's going to be the operator.
Yeah.
It's not going to be some networking person or some IT person going out there trying to figure it out. It's going to be the operations teams to respond and get that equipment safe, get product safe, make sure people are safe, before they start turning things off and tackling the problem. So, again, and so what we're seeing are companies that are going after OT-centric SOCs, right? One of our big partners is one of those, Rockwell. They have that. When you think of the Arctic Wolves and some of these firms have hired, because it's expensive to stand up a SOC, there's no argument there. If you want a 24/7, 365, follow the sun kind of a model, well, that's expensive to set up, right?
Very.
And we've worked with some of the IT SOCs, and they're in the same problem, and a client is, even if they have their own SOC. They got the same challenges. If you chose a third-party IT SOC that's doing your IT and your enterprise,
right,
and you're given it, but they might be doing something with the plant. But again, we have found it's either disruptive, they're not handling it appropriately, they're missing big chunks of the assets that are out there, and nobody knows how to get to them. And so you have to take approach from a different mindset.
There's a lot of pieces of that. Cost is one. How do you handle the alerts is the second one. How do you make sure that the alerts that you're bringing in are the relevant alerts on the operational side of the house versus a known security threat, a known signature?
Right.
How do you handle that versus something different? Is that as important? Is it something being masked as that? There's a lot of, I guess I would call them unknowns and very blurred lines that really are in the mix.
Well, you have to demonstrate value, and then the flip side of that narrative is accountability. And what I mean by value, meaning that you have to show value to the people in the manufacturing environment that what you're doing is helping them, right? And if you can't demonstrate that, then there's no working relationship. And that's typically what we find. I mean, that's generally most organizations out there. That's the disconnect between IT and OT. Have we seen it work well? Yeah,
Not yet.
not really yet. Not to the point where they're very collaborative line. Some organizations talk a good game, but in practice, it's not how it operates. Because I go back to what I've said previous is, then if that was true, then the IT leadership would be building bridges and relationships with the OEM and system integrations community that's spending most of the time working in these plants. And if you're not doing that, then you're still not doing it right.
Well, without doubt, you and I both know that. Pick a very large manufacturer, it doesn't matter who it is, and you were to go to the CIO or you were to go to the CISO, someone that manages their risk and governance for that organization and the security posture for that organization, and you would say, hey, if there's an issue on your plant floor, who would you call? They're going to call somebody at the plant manager who's running around with his hair on fire trying to put out whatever problem it is that just happened? Or, would he have access to Rockwell, Siemens, whoever his automation vendor is? And to your point you're trying to make, they wouldn't have that in the Rolodex, and they need to have that there.
I witnessed that during some big ransomware or malwares that were pushed out. Like when WannaCry came out, we witnessed that when I was working at Rockwell at the time. And you would think that the Rockwell teams would have been on the Rolodex, would have been, the second second group that a CIO would have called, if they were having problems with their manufacturing environments, but it didn't happen that way. It really, really didn't. It kind of falls back to the plant and their organization trying to deal with this the best way they know how, per se.
Yeah. So if we go back and we take a look at an OT SOC, can you think of maybe 3 or 4, what assets do you think would be critical that they would be part of the monitoring? Are there certain pieces of the environment that are more critical to monitor and to view and to be able to respond to, or would you look at them all, let's call them equally? Does it make a difference even?
You talking about IT monitoring it?
Well, right now, that's the only solution we have. There really isn't, outside of what Rockwell has, and a true OT-centric SOC. So if we are trying to make the best of what's available today until there is an option or an alternative available, what would you try and focus on if you were trying to figure it out today in a manufacturing site?
Well, working backwards through it, I mean, and focus on a security framework, I would go after asset inventory, right?
Right.
I'd want to try to make sure that I have as many assets as I have in my plant, into my intrusion detection system baseline, right? I at least want them documented, right? So that way I have the risk and vulnerabilities associated with them instead of just ignoring them, which is what we find everywhere.
Well,
Even companies that have been installing these tools for several years and still seeing a third or less than half of their assets. What was the point in buying the tool? And I've heard some people say, well, we don't care what goes on the east-west side. It's like, well, why is that not important? They don't have an answer for that.
Right.
The short answer is because you don't know anything about it. You don't know how to even deal with it. So you just ignore it. That's the real answer. It's not because you don't think it's important. It's because you don't understand it. Right.
Well, at least say, we're taking a phased approach. We're going to start with our north-south traffic. We're going to understand that. We're going to slowly start making our way down to greater visibility, that east-west traffic. Then we're going to figure that out. And then we're going to start introducing intrusion prevention and really try to start securing our environment. But you're right. It's just none of that's important. We're just going to do this.
Because if that was true for clients that have gone down this path and have been using these OT cybersecurity platforms for a number of years, all their capital projects that are coming in, whether they're doing lifecycle replacement, brownfield, greenfield expansions, the OEMs and system integrators they would be working with, they would be deploying collectors, sensors inside those machine centers as they're putting this stuff out of the field. Be proactive. If you were really trying to figure it out, you'd be ahead of the game by doing that, right? Against back to, I want the backup cameras and the airbags and the sensors and all the safety equipment on the vehicle when it's being built, not bolted on after the fact.
Well, it changes the narrative. It moves the environment and the mentality and the thinking from a break, fix, reactive mentality to a proactive, being in front of it, able to accurately forecast, accurately budget, accurately predict those assets and how you can better manage them.
Yeah. Well, to me, it demonstrates that there's still a wedge between the IT and the OT organization, in the context of I'm expanding my plant or I'm replacing old equipment with new equipment, and OT's doing it in a vacuum all by themselves, making all the selections on the equipment with the OEM and system integrator, and IT's role is diminished or is non-existent. Until that dynamic changes, you're going to get more of the same.
Yep, you're right. It's a slow shift. This is a giant battleship out on the ocean. It's not a speedboat, and it's not going to change overnight. And we've seen that. We've been beating this same drum since 2019, and it's still, not there yet.
I still talk to, mid-tier manufacturers that still have layer 2 flat unmanaged networks. Yeah. They've never seen or heard any of these tools that we're talking about that have been around for a decade. Don't even know what they're capable of, what they are, what they're doing. I think that their position is I defer cybersecurity when I hear it belongs to IT. It's not my problem if I'm an OT person, which is the wrong mindset to have. But we still witness that today. And at the same time, the OT ecosystem is not really pushing the needle into coming forward with security solutions and the equipment that they're making, just like they did with safety. You had to make safe equipment. Well, how do you start adding safety and security into that same equipment?
Well, yeah, there's that. And then you look at from an organization standpoint, how do you address and handle in the event you have something happen in the OT space? Who is your, let's call it phone tree? What's the SOC going to do? Who are you going to reach out to? What are the steps? You can't just start unplugging stuff. A lot of organizations want to make sure that they can still make product in a pseudo air gapped environment. They want to be able to continue to operate, but IT's mentality is cut the cord, be done. Let's save ourselves. And it doesn't work in an OT space though.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about the SOC, I mean, their job is really to hunt, right? I mean, if they've got their hooks into all of the systems that generally the enterprise has, they're looking for the rogue assets, they're looking for the malicious IPs, they're hunting malware, suspicious activities, systems that aren't part of the standard that have made their way to their environment. They're hunting that stuff all the time and looking for it and dealing with it when it comes up. They're not doing that at all on the plant floor. Not at all. Right. And so now you have this gap. Now, so the first question is do you care?
The answer should be yes for anybody that you ask that question to.
So who should you be talking to solve this problem? Because you already demonstrated you can't do it by yourself. Because if you could, you would. Right. Because we see that, right? I mean, part of the work that we do, because we go in there now, we're bringing these tools with us. We find all the things that I just mentioned. And it's usually a surprise to the organization.
They have no idea.
And IT looks at it, it's like, well, hell, I don't know what to do about it. I don't know why there's 4 or 5 different remote access technologies put in those panels that are out there on the plant floor. The OEM put it in there when they brought you the system and stood it up. They put that in there so they have access to if you called them and you needed help to figure out to calibrate the machine, for example.
Yeah.
Or work on some type of maintenance or, change its operation because you're making a different product with the same equipment. And IT doesn't have any idea what's going on and why they're doing it. So the question is do you want to solve that problem? And if you don't, if IT is not going to do it, resources, skills gap, doesn't think it's their responsibility, they don't want to be accountable, all of those things, well, then who should be stepping up?
But at the end of the day, and it still mind boggles me, but at the end of the day, the organization, the entire enterprise, the organization is responsible for figuring this out. And when you ask 6 people that should care in an organization of various levels, and 6 of them say, I don't know, it's not my problem. But at the end of the day, no one is doing anything because all 6 of them are pointing their finger at somebody else, and there's a gaping hole in the security posture. I'm baffled, to be honest with you. I'm baffled.
Well, it took IT probably 2 decades to get to the point to where they are,
Why can't we, in the OT side, learn the lesson and say, look, IT has made a roadmap for us. We need to adopt to different tools, different procedures, but the framework is there, and we're not going to let it take us 25 years. We can do this in 5. Pick us time that's reasonable, but you and I both know it's been 10 years, and the progress made has been almost non-existent.
Yeah. Well, again, the assets are different. The capital plan, it's different for this. And, obviously the life cycle is much different for OT assets compared to IT assets. And do I ever see that changing? It's always going to be a decentralized approach on the plant floor where IT is more centralized. You're never going to be able to change that dynamic. It's not like you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to try to standardize all your manufacturing facilities on the same automation technology, i.e. Rockwell or Siemens, or take your pick. The same thing with the network within those plants, the applications in those plants, the drives in those plants. They're not going to spend that kind of money. Now, if you're building new, Greenfield, that's a different conversation. Then you really should be thinking about that. And even then, we see that with whether it's the data center stuff that's being built, some of these others, they still are not implementing a cybersecurity solution around SCADA systems, control systems.
And there's a lot of, back to the brownfield, greenfield, there's a lot of, let's call it re-onshoring that's taking place. So there is some new greenfield development that has been, at least allocation of funds have been announced, whether they follow through or not, different conversation down the road. But there's a lot of that happening. So from a greenfield, organizations need to be taking advantage of that and standardizing and saying, our security partner. Our security approach, our security technology is X, Y, or Z. And every single panel that goes in this manufacturing environment is going to have Y in it so that we can collect this data. We are going to standardize on a networking platform, either Cisco switching or whatever they use. And every panel is going to have this make model in it. And if a vendor comes in, I know it's difficult, but they need to have a hard conversation and say, look, this is our message go forward, and we need to do this, and we need you to adhere to it. Doesn't always work that way, and I recognize that, but it needs, especially for the greenfield. Brownfield, again, should be taking the same approach as they are retrofitting and updating outdated panels.
Yeah, but as they're looking at equipment, and they might be looking at 5 or 6 different vendors, OEMs, supply them the machinery.
Yep.
And so you got these bids coming in, and they're going to vary, and they're looking to cut cost. That's why you find a lot of layer 2 unmanaged switches and a lot of this equipment, because it's cheap, because they're trying to compete to win the business, right? At the end of the day, the only thing they're thinking about is that thing is supposed to put milk in a bottle, or pasteurize that milk. That's all they're thinking about.
I get it.
Right? And they're not.
And we're caught in that same scenario sometimes when we are, as an integrator, bidding on a project, and the client is dictating, here's the number you have to get to. And we're trying to say, this is important. You should consider this. And at the end of the day, I don't know that we would walk away from something if a client said, here's your choice. You either put this in or we'll find someone else to do it. I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, well, there's always that, right? But don't get me wrong. I mean, I've seen both those arguments where it's either that you're going to do it our way or we're going to go find another partner.
Yeah.
Or I've seen the folks at the plant saying, I really want this piece of equipment and we are going to follow whatever they're going to tell us to do. And I don't care what the standards are, what some IT group's trying to tell me I should be doing, or, it doesn't matter. I just need for this thing to do X. And I really like these cheese gas shaker canned machines that are made in Switzerland.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're the SOC, you're always going to have blind spots. I mean, from a SOC perspective, you're not going to have visibility to the last mile in these manufacturing environments. So are you okay with that? Maybe
that's part of the risk. Maybe their acceptance of that unknown risk is some level of acceptability. I don't know. But every organization, it's going to be different.
Well, I mean, it'd be great if you could get IT and OT to work together. But trying to, it's perception versus perspective, and trying to figure out the other side's perspective. And I don't know how much of that is being done per se between these two groups, right? It's hard it's like politics almost, perception. You're trying to convince somebody to change their perception is like pushing a rope up a hill, right? You're just wasting your breath. The question is, how do you gain their perspective? And I
have dogs and cats living in my house, and they both get along fine. Sometimes there's fighting, but overall, they eat the same food occasionally. Sometimes they don't like each other, and they go to their own rooms, but it's okay.
Well, but again, back to that IT-OT relationship, again, how do you get them to understand each other's perspective? And do they want to work that way? And it's hard, right? Again, back to the global, think global, act local. Basically, you'd be telling the IT people, because the OT people are in the plant. They're not going anywhere, right?
They're not going anywhere yet.
Wherever that plant is, that's where they are. IT people are usually somewhere else. So how do you get that brain trust that's within that IT organization to come in and be part of everything that's going on in that plant, which means that you'd have to basically live there or at least spend a lot of time there, right? You can't show up every other year, maybe twice a year, or maybe you've never been to the plant. That's not going to cut it. You have to be part of that community.
Maybe the plant manager needs to invest part of their operating expense and buy some steel-toed shoes and pass them out to the IT teams to come down and learn what those assets are, what those assets do, how they intertwine with some of the IT network that they're responsible for, and see if they can figure it out. But you're 1,000% correct. It has to be a collective, collaborative effort.
Yeah, you have to attach them to the plant teams. Be part of the startup, be part of the operational runs, the morning meetings, the shift changes, all of it, the machine changes, product changes, activity going on in that plant. You have to somehow become part of that.
Well, shy of the IT team doing that, at minimum, the OT teams need a liaison like design group that can speak both sides, that can be there to make sure that as those conversations are being had, their best interest from an operational standpoint and a security standpoint are being heard and addressed from a SOC or an InfoSec team. There's resources out there. Don't go alone by yourself. We've said that 100 times. Choose a partner.
You know, you can't put the round peg in the square hole, so you need to go out there and figure out, why can't I do that, right? Well, how do I convert my square peg round to get it in that hole, right? And the only way to do that is to be part of that organization. Like I said, the plant people aren't going anywhere. So somehow you have to become part of that world, right?
Great conversation. I think we got some more work to do. And I think that there's definitely opportunity in that whole SOC conversion plan.
Yeah. Well, think OT SOC, because it's different than IT SOC.
Yes, for sure. Yep. Yeah. Feel free to reach out if you got questions. We're here to help you guys.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.